So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this new meetup part of the Building Performing Team series. I'm Daniele, and I'm the Chief Operation Officer of Codemotion. For who doesn't know Codemotion yet, let me give you just a quick presentation about it before giving the word to our awesome panelist and Piergiorgio as a master of ceremony. So we, as a Codemotion, are a platform delivering offline and online activity to support developers in their professional growth. We are aiming to create the largest developer community worldwide through our platform, and where we can organize online, offline conferences, meetups, hackathons, and moreover webinar, learning path or coding challenges for our developers. There's also a magazine aggregating all technical articles and videos very useful for developer ecosystem. In our platform, there is also an important section dedicated to tech communities that are usually the communities that are bringing added value to our conferences. Each community can have its own workspace where they can set up, manage their members, and the developer can check calendar and see what are the next meetups around Europe. Looking forward, we are organizing, as I said before, online a set of 3 online conferences for 2020, starting with the first one in end of October that is focused on Northern Europe countries and the Northern Europe developers ecosystem. The second one in early November, it will be focused on 70% with talks in Spanish. And at the end of November, another one that is focused in Italy with 70% of talks in Italian. So really dedicated to Italian developer communities. As I said before, this meetup is part of a series of appointments to bring us to the first conferences in fall. And now let me give the stage to our Master of Ceremony, explain what is all about this new appointment and this new meetup together. So the stage is yours, Piergiorgio, to present our awesome panelists. Enjoy.
All right. Thank you, Daniele. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen? All right, perfect. Well, hi folks, hi everybody. Welcome to the 3rd episode of Building Performing Teams, the online appointment for senior leaders in technology brought to you by Codemotion. Engineering leadership is hard, and as leaders, we want to always to drive the best performance for our products and organizations. And this comes with a variety of responsibilities, from organizing operations to shaping teams and roles, setting goals, setting technical direction, and of course, measuring results. And let me change the slide. This is the 3rd stop of our journey, a journey of 5 online panels to unravel all these themes together. A journey that will lead us to the online Codemotion conference in October, as Daniela said earlier. And at each panel, I will be your voice. And we will discuss each topic with a pool of proven technology leaders from different sectors of the industry. Each panel is roughly 1 hour long, and we'll start with a 30-minute session, 30 minutes discussion with a panelist on the selected theme. Today is going to be about delivering value. And it will be followed by a Q&A session where we will pick the most voted questions you asked via Mentimeter. And I will ask them to the panel, and we will cover them later. So I briefly mentioned Mentimeter, so let me cover what that is and how it works. So this is an interactive panel, and just by browsing to menti.com, by connecting there and entering the code that is at the top of your screen right now, so 25385 today, you get to participate to live surveys, and that will inform the panel, and you will get to ask and vote for the questions that we will address at the end of the session. Let me. All right, so let's cut the chase and let's enter into the topic of today. We're going to discuss the secret sauce for delivering value. So what is this about? So as leaders in technology, our performance is tied to our team's ability of delivering value, right? So, but what is value? So what is it, and how can we measure it in a way that is unbiased? In this session, we will unpack this word, unpack value, what it is, and we will discuss each different aspect of it together with our panelists. We will hear about the challenges they faced to maximize the produced value, from shaping the development and alignment processes to coaching their teams, and choosing the right tools and technology, and obviously getting the metrics right. So without further wait, I'm pleased to introduce our fantastic panelists in rigorous infographic order. Frank Amankwah, Head of Digital Engineering at Emirates Group. Hi, Frank.
Hello, everyone.
Renan Gutman, Executive VP of Product at Kaltura. Hi, Renan.
Hi, everyone.
And Chris Brooke, VP of Engineering at Spirable. Hi, Chris.
Hey, everyone. Hello.
So let's start from a brief round of introduction, and I would start myself, given that I haven't introduced myself yet. So my name is Piergiorgio Niero. You can call me PG, given that it's unpronounceable. You can find me in London or at Pijut, P-I-G-I-U-Z on Twitter. I'm head of engineering at SuperAwesome, where I lead a team of 50 kid tech engineers, making the internet safer for kids. What about you, Frank?
Hi, I'm Frank Amankwah, currently based in Dubai in the UAE. My handles on all social media is Agile Frankie. My background is software engineering. I did about 10 years of hands-on engineering, mostly in banks and financial institutions. Then I've spent the last decade, in several leadership positions. Currently at Emirates. Before Emirates, I worked at a gaming company in the UK called GameSys. I did a short stint at Amazon. So while I'm on this panel, I enjoy building high-performing teams. I enjoy coaching and mentoring technical leaders. So I'm looking forward to participating in this active discussion. Thank you.
Great. Renan, what about you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Renan Gutman. I've been at Kaltura for over 5 years, so quite some time now. My team is kind of a unique team. We're responsible for product design, and product marketing. So really thinking about that value all the way from engineering, all the way to the user and how we present it to the user. So it's a very broad view of how we deliver value. I spent also quite a few years at Microsoft before, and I spent a couple of years at MIT to focus on the MBA and entrepreneurship. And I'm kind of excited to talk about how you talk about value, not just whether you're in a small company, a big company, and thinking through that value across the different realms, whether it's through R&D all the way down to marketing.
Great. Chris, what about yourself?
So I'm Chris. I like other people, I come from an engineering background. So I started out as a developer. I did my time in banking as well before I saw the light and moved away to the world of startups. So I've spent the last 8 years or so as a CTO across multiple startups. I spent 5 years as CTO of a company called Hopster, who are an education entertainment platform for preschool kids. So we did a lot of interesting things there, growing the team out, launching in China, doing all sorts of fun things. I'm now the VP engineering at a company called Spirable. We're essentially a SaaS business, and we build a creative automation platform that lets companies and brands and agencies create data-driven video at scale. So we render millions of different types of video and distribute them out to different platforms. So it's interesting because we have a mixture of kind of product development and also innovation and R&D as well. So we have a couple of different lenses that we're focusing our engineering efforts on. So yeah, I've seen a few different engineering structures, so I'm keen to talk around what has worked and what hasn't worked for me in the past.
That's great. So let's delve into the definition of value, I would say. What is value? So the definition of value is heavily dependent on a wide range of variables, right? So from the company stage of growth, early stage versus startup versus scale up, and so on and so forth, or the industry a company is in, to what the products are like, how the teams are structured, and many others. And I would actually start to ask a question to the audience in regards to this. So what words would you choose, would you use in order to describe value to your teams? And to you, dear panelists, I would love to hear your experiences in regards to defining and explaining what value is and what value means to you, to your teams. Chris, do you want to crack on with this?
Yeah, sure. It's a big topic, no doubt. I'm gonna choose not to use any of the adjectives that you've kind of listed out there. I think kind of for me, value is something that's very customer centric. What you're doing is creating value for the people that are using the platforms that you're creating, and that's where the value comes from. So I'm a really big fan of putting customers at the heart of everything that you do. So you can kind of quantify and you can measure that in a variety of different ways. But I think the true value of what you're delivering is that great experience to the people that are using the product that you're creating. Everything your company does and its ultimate success is judged by the ability that you have to deliver a product that people want to use. So you have your different business outcomes that are linked to that. But I think it's one of those things that you have to have a fairly pragmatic approach to it as well. It depends on, as Piergiorgio said at the beginning, it really depends on what state your business is at. Value means different things at different states, different companies, different markets. There's a time where new feature development is important. There's a time when R&D is important. It could be some tech debt that you have to challenge. It could be white labeling a platform. So it really, really depends. I think how I've looked at this in the past is I'm very keen on putting kind of KPIs and metrics against delivering value. So especially at a company like Hopster, which was a direct-to-consumer platform, we had very much a kind of a cross-functional team set up where you had a team responsible for a particular KPI, and that was their mission to deliver on. So you'd have a metric, and they would then be kind of autonomous against a roadmap that they could build to deliver against that metric. And you could translate that to real value that you could see the users gaining from it. So you can use your product analytics, you can use the insights from kind of user testing, talking to users, as well as the data that you're pulling in to try and actually quantify the value that you're delivering. I think in a SaaS business, it's a little bit different. Your value is still measured against what user engagement you get as well. But then you have different metrics like your ARR, your monthly recurring revenue, your churn numbers. All of those kind of metrics are important as well. So they're all things that you have to bear in mind. But I think I won't talk much more. I think it's generally kind of having that customer obsession about what you're doing and making sure that you are delivering things that provide value to your users. And I think that's, as I said, it can be measured in quantifiable ways, but that is the key for me.
That's great insight. Who wants to continue on this? There's so much to say.
Yeah.
Renan?
Yeah, sure. I think, and I agree with you. I think there's, it gets very complex on the company type. So when you're doing a B2B business, it's a very different story than when you're doing a B2C business. And I think it gets much more complicated with B2B because the selling process is a very different process than the buying, the user and the end user at the end of the day. And that's a very critical point in there. So delivering value, you have to understand delivering value to where in the chain. Are you delivering value to the person who's buying? Are you delivering value to the person who's administering? Are you delivering value to the people that are actually using it? I think value is a little bit hard to define. I often use actually the words impact and how you drive impact in different places. And I often look at adoption, especially when you're thinking about, was it worth it? Or was it, when you're measuring something, think about adoption. And adoption is a really good way of saying, was this something that people at the end of the day, actually people use and people talk about and people refer to? Because, sometimes we deliver things just to get that checklist off, but it's not really a value add for customers. So I think that's I often like to think about it as impact, because I think when you're thinking about making a difference for someone else, it gives a lot of motivation about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
I think that was a really interesting
Great.
point you made around the different
Yeah,
levels.
yeah. So thanks, Renan. I think I'll sort of jump on your impact comment, right? I actually wrote a brief statement in my notepad here, and I mean I wrote down that for a given goal or objective, right, value is defined as when the deliverable actually provides the impact to the end consumer or the end user, right? And I think the key thing here is impact. You can build cool things, but if they don't actually have an impact on the person or the people you're building it for, then you haven't actually delivered any value. The other thing, and I get asked this question a lot by my teams, is when is value delivered, right? So if you think about the airline, the ecosystem, right? I run the digital platform, so we are the customer facing bit of the airline. But behind us, so much happens from when the customer actually buys the ticket to when they actually fly and then get to their destination and get back home, right? So where is the value actually being delivered? So you realize that value is not this unary thing that you deliver once. You could deliver it in small chunks. But until that holiday is actually complete and they're back home, you might not even have delivered any value. So I might think that selling a ticket is my value done, but that might just be a small fraction of the actual value proposition for that end user. So I think value really depends on a number of things. It depends on who's paying for it and who's consuming it, right? And you have to make sure that the consumer might be the person who actually gets the impact, but the adoption and the numbers might be the value to the person paying for it, right? So I think value is not this one thing that you can achieve by ticking a box. There's so many different facets to it, and you have to look at it holistically as opposed to as a checkbox item.
That's a very good point, actually. The continuity, the continuous loop of value, continuous value stream. And one of the questions that I would ask you, folks, as a follow-up is, how I totally agree with you, Frank, on the fact that value is not just a checkbox that you can tick, but the more you fragment this, this value stream into small chunks of delivery, the more you lose track of the whole picture. So is there anything that you found worked or you found didn't work in your experiences that helps people or help your people to actually connect all the dots and understand what the whole stream is about, or what the actual value that is delivered is about?
So a technique that we use is value stream mapping, right? Where you sort of map out the whole value stream. You sort of understand the different steps that happen for the actual value to get delivered to the customer. We sort of focus on reducing waste in the value stream and trying to shrink that cycle time, the time from when it's just an idea to when it's actually in the hands of a customer, or when it's available for a customer to sort of avail that benefit. Looking at the big picture is always important. Obviously, there'll be KPIs at the different steps, right? Different KPIs, for the different steps. When it's a customer-facing step, obviously there's the 3 A's, 3 R's, marketing jargon for acquisition, right through to referrals and retention. If it's behind the scenes, there's a different set of KPIs. But just looking at those KPIs separately don't really give you a holistic picture. You have to sort of be able to correlate them, right? Because one KPI going one direction might mean another KPI has to go another direction for you really to measure that value to the end customer. So I think using the right KPIs, measuring them at the right time, and creating a view where you can actually correlate them is quite important to actually measure whether the value has been delivered the way you want it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that around kind of making sure the team is exposed to what is giving value to your customers. I think getting that kind of level of empathy with customers within the team is an important thing to do. So, you know, we've used lots of different techniques around that, from, you know, things like when someone's onboarding, get them on intercom support for their first couple of weeks so they actually can talk directly to customers to understand where the pain points are, to understand how people are using the platform. I think kind of building up that level of empathy is a really important thing. You can look at the data, you can look at the numbers, but exposing people to actual conversations with people who are using the platform, I think that's hugely valuable.
And I would totally agree with that. And I think, you know, oftentimes, you know, we use personas to try to really connect with our users and try to get that. And some of the things that we've been doing is we've been trying to make those personas even more human. So not just give them a name and like a, you know, a description of their skills, but actually we look through Twitter and we look at user comments and we see what would that persona say, kind of bring that in. Or we look at emails that we get from customers and we say, hey, this is how we talk, or here's how they're thinking about this different topic. And all in all, I think, you know, first, that direct connection to a customer and creating that empathy is a really critical piece to really understanding why that's valuable for them. And I would also, you know, I would say exactly as Frank said, you know, value is about delivering everything at every point in time. And for me, a big piece of this is really understanding how each story that we write, all the way to the level of the story, is changing or impacting something and worth it. And that's why we're doing it. And I think that's the big piece of it, of really getting every detail. And that's how you also know, you know, you're doing the right thing at the right time, because you're saying, this is why I'm doing this right now. It has a huge impact on my users, even if it's like, you know, I save them 2 minutes because they know it's done automatically and they know they'll have to do it. This is valuable for them because I saved those 2 minutes. So I think that having that split, and I would say that, you know, when you're looking at these things, you know, you often have to look all the way from the KPIs that you said is great. And at the company level, that's awesome. But also look at the really specific metrics, how many people are using, how many people are doing that, and also qualitative metrics. What sort of feedback are you getting? Are you seeing, like, you know, heart tweets coming out by people enjoying what you're doing? Like, really look across the board at all your data points in order to understand what sort of value you're delivering and how that's making an impact.
Chris mentioned a very important point, and I think it's a point that as leaders we miss a lot, right? And it's ensuring that the team, right, you know, the smallest team at the lowest point, actually sees the impact that the work they're doing actually has on the customer, right? You know, so engaging them, getting them to do customer support calls, you know, bringing customers in and, you know, getting them to talk to the team. I think it's such a motivator, but, you know, most oftentimes in the heat of the frenzy of delivery, we forget that, you know, and we sort of leave them in the corner, and we consume these metrics and, you know, do high fives, and, you know, we don't never show the teams. So that's very important, Chris. I'm glad you mentioned that. The other thing that I also wanted to mention is that, you know, one of the things that, you know, has helped me to sort of motivate teams and get them to think with the value delivery in mind is encouraging them to ask why, right? So usually, you know, the requirements will usually come top down, right? You know, some exec thinks about an idea and then it makes its way down to the team, and usually the teams don't know why they're doing this, yeah. And not knowing why means that, you know, they're probably going to miss the point, right? They miss the point and miss what's really important in what they're doing. So I think encouraging our teams to ask why, to challenge what they're doing, and to really understand the value it creates is also a very important point, in addition to what Chris mentioned.
Great. Let's stop a minute and look, and let's look at what the audience wrote. Well, what the audience said. So according to the audience, well, actually, let me ask you this question, given that you are the panelists, guys. So is there anything that you, I don't know, you disagree with, you agree with, any comment that you have to do, that you want to do on how the audience ranked these objectives on how to describe value? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is there anything missing?
I think the customer is always right. So if this is what people think, then I think qualitatively good, that makes perfect sense. And having something that's measurable, that's definitely there.
Yeah.
Popular as being the last metric is an interesting one.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting to see that as well. I mean, secure being at number 9 as well is interesting, right? Because
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure the investors would have something to say about that.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that cost efficient is higher than profitable. So kind of we're looking at how to optimize and remain with our current profits rather than thinking about how do we make it even more profitable. That's kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because, as we said, this would vary greatly if you kind of put a lens on a particular company at a different stage in a different industry. It would dramatically shift that, no doubt. Something like security in a kid tech firm or a bank is going to be a lot higher.
Exactly. Another one that strikes me immediately is ethically good for me is number 0. Well, we make the internet safer for kids, so there's nothing, more than that. But yes, as Chris said, also security for me is massively off. It should other companies like Amazon. I mean, Frank, you being in Amazon, right? So security is like point number 0 for them. So everything must be secure secure
by design. Secure by design. Yeah.
Yeah, and in SuperAwesome we have privacy by design and responsibility by design, because our products will end up in the hands of kids. But yeah, that was a good chat. Let's pass to one of the points that was briefly introduced by Renan, because you said we have to optimize to make the most valuable thing at the right time. So let's enter in prioritization land, I would say. One aspect of delivering value is more, with no doubt, how we go about prioritizing work for our teams. So in this setting also, there is always some tension. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower, but there is tension between the different stakeholders. So everybody is trying to bring the grist to their own meal. And should we prioritize tech debt? Another point that Chris mentioned earlier. Should we prioritize feature X or whatever? So yeah, I already see people, entering. Yeah, it's this thing with Mentimeter is fantastic. Well done, guys at home. So my question, the question for the audience is already kicking off, which is great. The question for you folks is, what is your secret sauce for balancing the different priorities while achieving the best outcome? Frank, do you want to start on this?
Yes, I can give it a stab, right? So I think, over my career, I've sort of come across various ways of prioritization, but the one that sort of stuck with me and the one that I find the easiest to use is prioritizing by value and by risk, right? So for any deliverable, be it a story, be it a feature, I mean, if you work in an iterative fashion, right, what you should be doing is, I mean, if you work in a waterfall fashion, obviously all this goes out the window, right? But let's assume that we're in an agile world, it's all iterative. The focus, I believe, should be on how do you deliver the highest business value or ROI generating items at the same time reducing risk to the business. Okay, so risk is things like technical debt, things like new technologies that you don't know about, all those things. How can you front load those things, right? So how can you deliver the most value quickly and reduce the risk almost at the same pace, which means that if at some point in the near future you run out of funds, you've still delivered something of value and you've reduced as much risk as you can. That way, you learn fast, you fail fast, and you can recover quickly, right? So the subtle combination of business value and risk reduction is, for me, one of the best ways to prioritize the delivery of features or value to your customers.
Thank you. Who wants to continue on this?
Renan?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think, to be honest, I think there's no single answer, and that's the truth about this. And this is somewhat of a balance that we have to do at any point in time, and it's driven by a lot of things, which is why I wouldn't say this is really a science and a very specific, here's the right way of doing this. there's always going to be an opinion in some shape or form. For me, I think one of the critical pieces that I've learned is that the way to look at this is to think about this very small pieces. That means that instead of saying, these are the top 3 things and we're going to put everything on these top 3 things, if you start looking inside, you say, well, in this first top thing or whatever we're working on, actually only the first part is really critical and everything else maybe we can move aside. And once you start having that level of conversation, you're able to provide that prioritization in a much more detailed way, and you're able to advance. Instead of advancing just 3 runners, you're advancing 10 runners at the same time, and at different speeds and at different levels, and maybe in different ways. But you're not necessarily going for full starvation on some processes and helping others, right? Like when you say, I want to develop a new feature, you don't suddenly say, and all previous features no longer get support. You actually have to say, of course, we have to continue and work. So, and I think, I kind of mentioned this before, but to me, this goes all the way down to the story and the bug. And at every point in time, we have to think about this. And my team's probably heard me say this 1,000 times, but the way I think about it is, if you only had one person that could work on one thing at one point in time, what would be the most important task you would give them out of all the tasks in the world? And now, great, you can parallelize and you have a lot more people, but really think about it that way. And when you always prioritize the most important thing that you want to do right now, and you think about it in order, and you really think about what you can deliver, that's when you really get into that prioritization. Maybe it's a bug, maybe it's a support ticket, maybe it's a new feature. Whatever it is that you're doing, you're always working on the most important thing. The thing that's gonna, be really the critical thing that you think is the one thing you want to work on and deliver out. If you only had one person doing this. And I think when you really get into the weeds, when you start doing prioritization that way, it's harder. It's a lot harder, but it gives out phenomenal results, because at the end of the day, you're always focused and you're always minding. You're not really saying, I want to focus just on this or just on that. You're really addressing everyone and you're saying, who has the most important thing for me to work on?
Great input.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think I like the thing you say about breaking it down to as small as possible parts. That's one of the things that my CEO must be bored of me banging on around, is kind of chunking things up into individual deliverables. I think that's so important to do that, not to have this massive behemoth of thing that's going to take you 6 months to deliver, because you're not going to see value on that anytime soon. I think with prioritization, there is definitely no secret sauce behind it. It's pragmatism, I think, is one word that always comes to mind when talking about prioritization, that you've got to be pragmatic at the given point in time that you're at. We've talked about it, but different things are going to be important at different stages and different times. So I think the key is always be willing to reflect on your prioritization. It never ends. It continues constantly. You're always going to be rejuggling things. You're always going to be reevaluating things. If you're setting your roadmap too far in the future, you're setting yourself up to be left behind and not to be able to innovate. So I think it's continually evaluating where you are. I think one of the key things that I've learned is around making sure you are transparent and communicating why things are being prioritized as well. So prioritizing a roadmap is such a polarizing thing that people have their opinions around what is important, and lots of people have lots of reasons for thinking that's important. But I think if you can be very transparent with people, take them along for the ride with you, talk to them around why things are being done, explain the cost benefit of doing things, I think that's when you get buy-in, and that's the important thing for me. That would be my key takeaway.
Yeah, all good points.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing to add as well. I mean, you both talked about the size, right? I think going with the smallest possible size is always a good thing, because if you get it wrong, right, it's a small thing, right? And I think that's an important part, because you will get it wrong. Yeah, you will make mistakes. You will prioritize the wrong thing. But if your item is small and your cadence is a small time box, then you find out very quickly, right? And then you can pivot and choose something else. So yeah, that's what's one important point.
Yeah, and I think, that's exactly the point, right? That flexibility. I think the prioritization, understanding and being able to change prioritization and getting that feedback and reprioritizing and having that flexibility is a really critical piece. And while I know everyone wants to know everything in advance, please tell me, your 5-year roadmap and specifics. At the end of the day, you know, the benefit for all of us is in that flexibility and in knowing, you know, that we can actually change our minds, and we can get new information that will change it and provide that. And I totally agree with you, Chris. I think the communication around this, and I think it's really hard, I have to say, because 90% of the things you're saying no to. And that's not a fun position. You know, I'd love to be the person that's always like, yes, we also do this. But actually, the truth is we choose very few things that we do, and we don't choose most of the time things to do. So I think that communication is it's definitely the most complex thing. And it's also a critical piece.
So it's an interesting point you talked about saying no to things. I mean, one of the things that I don't know where I picked it up from. Instead of saying no, you say yes if. Yeah. So you say yes if you don't have this, you can have that. And usually people leave you alone, right? Because when you say no, you become the bad guy, right? But you always give them a choice, you know. Yes if you won't get that, you get that. You know, they normally leave you alone anyway.
What can we deprioritize to prioritize this other thing?
Exactly. Yeah. Your choice.
Yeah, I think it's down to taking people along for the ride with you. That as long as you're talking through the reasons why things are being deprioritized, you can get people involved in that decision. I think it's kind of moving away from the things that you're prioritizing, having that open communication, but kind of making sure you're prioritizing things for the right reason. So you've got your validation that's gone into the things that you're building. Don't prioritize based on kind of gut reaction or isolated sales requests or anything like that. Make sure that you've got the data and you're able to kind of have that conversation when you're talking about it. And it's not just, I felt like it was a good idea. You've got something to back it up.
To add to this, I mean, it's not just not prioritize against a sales input, but one of the other points that Renan mentioned earlier, you said that you use personas, right? So it also depends user input. Given that the first item in what the audience is saying is that prioritize against user feedback. I mean, it really depends what who your users are, because it's even possible that depending on the personas that you're considering, the input is the opposite. So one of the things that surprised me in SuperAwesome is that we deal with two type of customers, right? Two type of users, the parents on one side and the kids on the opposite. So basically we are saying kids, we should optimize for only if we would prioritize only for the overlap of these two personas. Well, I mean, I don't know if you guys have kids. I have. I mean, we would do very little if we just prioritize on user feedback.
I can deeply relate to that, being at Hopster for 5 years. We had exactly the same thing, that your end users are not the ones who you're going to get feedback from necessarily, and they should go out and actively seek it, because even from like a marketing point of view, you're marketing to the parents, but you want to get the kids engaged, and the parents are going to continue paying based on the engagement that the kids have. So trying to get that loop right is super difficult.
Yeah, which was my earlier comment about, you know, who's paying and who's using, right? And sometimes they're not the same people, and the way you sort of deliver value to the different groups is quite different.
Yeah. And another point that you mentioned earlier, Chris, is that you have to take your people with you in a journey, right? So one of the things that I learned that I would like to share here is to cultivate personal relationships with. You said people in sales, yes, they are with us. We are in product or in engineering or in a different department. So people from the other departments, from other functions, are with us in this journey to deliver value. So cultivating personal relationships is key because it lowers the friction so much, and it enables us to have honest conversations about, you know, and understand what is the actual reason why they are asking for that type of thing, that they are pushing for something to be prioritized. and eventually we can end up disagreeing in principle, but committing just to help a coworker of ours to deliver value on their front, because it might be that, I don't know, everybody else in their team is on holiday and they cannot deliver without your help, or it might be anything, literally. So yeah, these are my 2 cents on this topic.
Yeah, I think that's very important.
Very valid.
I think one thing I would add onto this list that we see on the screen here is also the people that indeed you have available, right? So if you have a certain team of front-end developers, maybe you're not going to invest in doing your backend. So, and I would even take that, you know, not just availability, but also growth. You have a tech team. It's really hard to keep and hire a good development team, and want to make sure that they are happy as well, and they're growing and they have their roles within this. So I think that sometimes comes into play as well.
It's interesting in that graph that technology is last on the list of things that come into prioritization. Clearly, everyone's doing a great job managing their tech debt.
It shows
it's interesting. I mean, you know, it's usually not just tech debt; it's also like, you know, innovation, right?
Innovation,
you know, the rate of change of the tech that we have to deal with, you know, it's very important to actually factor that in, and I think we normally don't think about it, and then it comes and bites us in the backside because we didn't understand how that thing worked. Yeah. It's interesting.
To Renan's point, given that you said earlier that you consider adoption a technology adoption converts into a technology of constraint that is the scalability of the software on which our value is delivered. So yeah, well, that's a good problem to have anyways. We cannot grow too much because we have software limitations.
But it's quite interesting though. If you look at the second and the fifth, they're in reality they're in the right places, right? Because there's always this pull between business value and tech debt, right? You know, and that's actually being depicted here in their positions on the Mentimeter graph, because the business goals always trump the tech debt, but you know, we have to try and bring them together as much as we can.
I think the technology point that you made, Piergiorgio, that's a bigger conversation for another day around kind of premature scaling and at what point do you put that effort in?
Yeah, that's going to be another panel.
That's a long discussion.
Yeah. All right, so let's change gear and let's talk strategy. So one question that I have for you folks is, how do you go about defining the long-term plans? So earlier, Chris, you said it boils down to be pragmatic, right? So not everything can be seen just with that type of lens, right? If you start on a gym on January and you do, you know, a few sessions of abs, you will not see the results immediately. I've done it, I failed, and I gave up. That's I talk out of personal experience here. So the question here is for you is how do you go about defining the long-term plans for your company, for your teams? What are the processes and the tools or techniques that you use to align the teams towards the same direction? And what did you find working best for you? I mean, Renan, this question is probably best suited for you given your title.
Yeah, I think the real answer is all of the above, and I'll explain why. I think, you know, you want to give a long-term plan, and whether it's 2 years or 5 years or 3 years, that's less important. I feel like it depends on kind of how your market and how far you feel like you can see, but I think having that's more of your vision. Like, here's where I want to be, or here's where I see the market trends going. Here's where I believe innovation has a place. You know, really thinking about that. And I would also add that this is kind of how you're thinking about your sustainable competitive advantage. Like, here's how I'm building. That kind of brings in the tech debt and all of those. A lot of that is how you start building your sustainable competitive advantage. But then that's a really long-term strategy, and that's very hard to plan for. That's kind of giving you a framework of where you want to work, and that's giving everyone on the team a way to prioritize what they're doing and think about what they're doing and how it's connected to where the company's going. But then you have to scale it back down, and you have to say, okay, but assuming I want to get there, let's talk about what I do in a year. Let's talk about what I do in 6 months, and let's talk about what I do in the next sprint. So kind of quarter or sprint. So oftentimes, when I think about commitment or how far I need to commit, I would look at, a quarter or 2 quarters forward at the most, because I found from that point on, you start missing deliveries because there's too much of that estimation and other things coming in, and sales cycles and all that kind of comes in. So I feel pretty confident with 2 quarters ahead. But when it goes ahead of that, it gets a little fluffier, and then I don't want to commit as far. So I think it's it's a question of the level of commitment that you're going to give on those deliveries, and also how big of a statement are you going to make? And I think you really need to have all of those in mind, because that 5-year plan, that's what it's giving everyone, that kind of full marathon. Here's where we're going. Here's what we're doing. Here's why I'm part of this big thing. The year is kind of a way for me to say, I want to check myself, compared to where I should be, compared to what I expected. How do I check in and make sure that I'm on the right track, that I'm doing the right things, that I'm doing what we wanted? And then on the quarterly basis, this is kind of the day-to-day. Can we deliver on time? Can we do this? Are we progressing in exactly the detailed level that we want to? And when you think about the strategy in all of those places, and you write a strategy that's aimed at each one of these time perspectives, you create something that different people relate to in different ways, but they can always connect it to what you're doing. And it kind of goes back to what Chris was saying before about communication, and it goes back to what Frank was saying about risk. How do you, on the one hand, manage that risk around it, but also communicate to people in a way that they can come along for the journey and join you in what you're trying to achieve, or how you're building out that strategy.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. I think it's kind of in that kind of 3 to 6 month lens always feels like the right kind of lens, especially in the startup world, where perhaps looking too far in the future can be kind of not anti what you're trying to do. But I think it is getting that mix right of giving people enough scope to look far enough into the future that when they're faced with a problem in front of them, they have a slightly longer term view of how, if it's an engineer, knowing that something's going to evolve in such a way affects how you're going to solve the problem today. So I think giving that lens is important, but it's also important not to go too far, because things are going to change, and you're going to struggle to be reactive as you need to be. There is a degree of absolute strategy, but there's also a need for reactivity as well, especially in a kind of a startup environment. So I think that 3 to 6 months has always felt like a kind of a nice kind of level that I've always tried to move towards, while having kind of the future ideas as well. So you've got the 12-month plan around maybe a re-platform or whatever the case may be, but that's slightly more opaque, and you have that as kind of your blurry, more distant vision that you can then, as you get closer to today, that's when it can be broken down into something that's more granular. So I think as long as you're kind of setting that strategy and setting that mission in the longer term objectives, and then kind of reeling it back to something that's actionable in the shorter term.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very interesting, and I think you're both coming at it from a startup perspective. I'll come at it from a bit of an enterprise perspective, because that's my current reality. I think one of the things that I've found quite powerful, because we're going through a big tech transformation as we speak, and we're halfway through it, and I think one of the things that at least resonates with me is using declarations, right? Using what I call big, hairy, audacious goals, right? To really paint the destination, paint the future. These have to be scary, right? Because if they're not scary, they're not big enough, right? But they also have to be as high level as possible, so that whatever you do, whatever pivots or changes you do on that journey, don't really change that particular outcome, right? So our current one, if I'm pretty allowed to say, that we're moving to cloud, right? And if you think about an enterprise, we do have quite a lot of on-premise legacy data centers, and you name it. And we have a goal to get to cloud by a certain date in the future, right? It's a big goal, right? If you look at the share of things that we have, is quite huge. but it's also quite motivating because you know that it can be done. So everything you do, any decisions you make, whether it's your yearly objectives or goals, whether it's your quarterlies, they're all aimed towards that goal. So that's the main thing. The end goal should be big enough so you almost feel as if it's impossible. That is a bit of a motivator for the team. The other thing that I've sort of seen both startups and enterprises fail at, because I've witnessed or been part of it, is that the communication of progress towards that big goal isn't always connected and consistent. If it's a 18 to 24-month goal, there must be some metrics that show progress or lack of, right? Because people, it's almost like use a bit of gamification to show that progress. It's very, very important. I think sometimes the focus shifts and then the communication sort of totally moves, even though that goal is still what it is. So for making the goal big enough so that it inspires the troops is one thing, but showing progress towards that goal is also very important, and that's where I believe that a lot of companies fall short.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say. I mean, one of the things that kind of strikes me is that both you, Chris, and you, Renan, are aligned on the 3 to 6 months cadence, I would say, or horizon. And one of the things that we do at SuperAwesome is that we tend to have different granularities depending on the scope, right? As you said, it becomes more opaque as you go further, but still we try to, without setting the goals in the way you, Frank, described, we try to reason in company vision, company mission. So vision is 5 years from now, company mission is what we're going to do this year, then company objectives, what we're going to achieve this quarter, and what is the strategy to achieve those objectives in the short term, so that leaves us the flexibility that we need in order to wiggle around should, I don't know, a pandemic strike or something like that. I don't know if that happened to you. Yeah, probably yes.
Yep. In a big way.
Yeah, exactly. It's and another thing that in our case we have to consider is the industry landscape, but also the macroeconomic and the macro. I would say in our case it's much macro politics landscape looks like, because in our case we work with kids digital regulations. Basically, we make products that enable the different brands to do private by design and responsible by design solutions that are compliant out of the box with the current legislations, and the legislations on that front, specifically about kids, are always evolving. So when I joined SuperAwesome, GDPR was not even released. It was not even enforced, right? So there was just COPPA in the States. Then GDPR happened a couple of years ago. Now CCPA became a thing in California. Now other countries are evolving that their legislations to protect kids online. So macro legal, macro politic. I don't know what is the English term to define that, but yeah, the legal landscape, global legal landscape, has a big impact on the way we prioritize. So yeah. All right, and it seems also that the audience agrees with what we said, so no surprise. Yeah, which is good. So let's move to Q&A. So I don't see any question popping up. So just to recap, if you go to menti.com as you did for the charts for the surveys and enter 2538.5, you can submit your questions. And while we wait for questions to pop up, is there anything that we didn't cover, guys, that you want to talk about on this topic?
I was just going to ask Frank a question around, you were saying in your kind of roadmap planning, you have these audaciously big goals. How do you measure success against those goals? Is that kind of something that OKRs is well set up for because they're kind of continuously stretched objectives? Is that kind of the model that you guys are using?
Yeah, so we, I mean, it's a very valid question, and yes, we use sort of OKRs that are sort of, you have high-level objectives, but then for every quarter we have, you know, the granular ones to sort of map to those objectives, and then each of these objectives match to a higher order goal, if you want to think about like a vision type goal, which is the longer term one. You know, we try, and I think we're still on that journey, you know, to use metrics and KPIs, relevant KPIs to whatever we're doing quite rigorously. I mean, just measuring the KPI itself is not the goal here. It's the trend, right? Actually seeing that trend going in the right direction over time, and being able to understand and write narratives for the blips or whatever, you know, the events that cause the hockey sticks or the dips, you know. It's that level of insight is what we use to actually make sure that we're on track. You know, we have fallen foul of the forgetting to communicate it, you know, many times, and that's why I sort of say it quite openly that, you know, you can do all of that, but if you don't communicate to the people it matters to, and this is mostly the teams, then you won't get the outcome you're looking for. Because I mean, teams are, you know, they're humans. They like to game stuff. They like to win, right? You know, so when you share this with the people who actually make it happen, then you will see the impact because they want to make it better. So yes, so
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think one of the
what
reasons...
what is your experience in this space?
So, I mean, the reason I kind of asked that is in the startup space, I've tried to use OKRs a few times and I haven't had success with OKRs yet. So I'm always interested to hear around kind of success stories around them. I think, so in two different startups now, I've kind of, at one of them, we've tried twice to roll out OKRs and never had really good company buy-in.
Okay.
I think what we were missing is kind of that one, I don't know if it's like an organizational figurehead or something, who is the person responsible for, you know, making sure that we are following the right process and the right OKRs are set at the right level. My assumption is that's what was missing, but generally I've had so KPI goals against specific teams has always worked well. So having cross-functional teams with missions and KPIs associated with that, I've had success kind of running that model before. I've had less success with the OKR model, especially from OKR for objectives for kind of both roadmap decisions, but also like personal development as well. So I'm kind of always interested to hear, like, for people who've done OKRs, how do they make it work?
Yes, I mean, so when we set out to do this, we had 5 or 6 high level, right, and they were quite generic, right? So you could use them as a framework, not as a straight jacket. And I think the different, you know, divisions or the different departments were free to then interpret within their context what that meant for them. What was sacrosanct was the measurable, right? Was the outcome, the actual measurable thing. And obviously, you know, if you go from infrastructure to engineering to security, the measurables will be different, yeah? But the goal stays the same. And it also allows you to then, you know, bring it back into a unified view to say, this is how we're trending on the pillars that support these objectives, right? So I think using as a framework worked better for us as opposed to a straight jacket, because you can't prescribe the medium to low level aspects, but the high level can be. And I think also one thing is sticking with it long enough to see the impact.
I think that's the key. I think from what I've seen before, I think it's always been a bit of a struggle to try and drag people along on the journey, and it gets forgotten about very, very quickly. And I don't think that's what I'm saying. That kind of one person who's like the person driving it and getting the organizational buy-in, I think that was the thing that was missing.
Yeah. it has to come from as high up as you can go, and I think also it has to be relevant to your detractors, if you know what I mean. There has to be something in there for everyone, right? So your choice of the objectives, the high level ones, is very important. And I think, you know, rather than doing it in a closed room with 3 or 4 people, you should get as much input as you can at that level, right? Because when people feel a bit bought in, then you get less resistance.
Communication is key.
So, I mean, I would just add to that. I've had experience both in very large companies. So, you know, I worked at Microsoft, and I remember we used to spend over a month writing. We had commitments, not OKRs at the time. I don't know what they do now, but I mean, the second I submitted my commitments, usually I found that, you know, something changed in the roadmap, and I need to completely rewrite them, and it became irrelevant. So I was never a fan, and I can tell you kind of the way I approach this, and I think it's a little bit different from what Frank's been doing, because I found the same. I found it just didn't work for me. Definitely not for me personally, but also for a lot of people. And I think the way I see OKRs is more of a personal thing rather than a company thing. So I think a lot of people actually need the OKRs to do a check-in with themselves, to know that they're on the right track and they're looking at it. So I see OKRs more of as a tool for each person on the team to know that they are focusing on the right things and doing a lot of what they're looking for, which is why oftentimes for the OKRs, I would include a personal development one for my team, but rather so more of a check-in for yourself rather than as a way to drive the company. And on the way, that should do the same thing, right? So your OKRs are built according to those strategic timelines that we talked about and the overall focus and all that. Then it kind of brings it more to the personal level. So for me, I usually present it as a tool for each person. And I have to say, I always say, you know, think of it as a tool for yourself. So, you know, don't spend, you know, hours and weeks writing these and then rewriting because something changed in the roadmap. Like, don't spend that cycle on it. And instead think about what would be overall the right thing to do, that no matter what wouldn't change, or what would be the thing that should be directing what you're thinking and help you do that, and then go from there. Because I think at the end of the day, everyone gets motivated a little bit differently and gets and needs help or needs ways to do things a little bit differently. We, you know, our focus often changes. I'm sure for you guys it changes. You know, suddenly there's this new big project, suddenly there's a big sale we need to do, suddenly we say, oh, we want to hit this market, and you know, we change completely. GDPR comes in and it changes your priorities completely. Like, there's so many things that are happening, but there is a consistency within it. So for me, it's all about thinking about what would help my team members focus on what they're doing and what would be helpful for them. And if it's helpful for them, we'll spend time on the OKRs and we'll spend time defining them and help them build that framework. And if it doesn't help them, then let's get it, you know, let's kind of define what's needed. And as long as I understand and you understand that you're working on the right priorities, and I have a check-in, you know, to make sure that we're working on our priorities, we can move forward with this. And that's not necessarily the best tool for the job. So I take a little bit more of a flexible. I'm sure, you know, that's not overall what everyone likes.
You raise a valid point. I mean, you raise a valid point, and that's why I sort of trying to make the point about the high-level framework, right? I think autonomy is a very important thing, right? Whether it's an enterprise, whether it's a startup, and I think it's more important in the startup because you need to move fast, right? And I mean, coincidentally, the framework we actually use it for the personal developmental goals as well. But the framework was so high level that you could use it for anything, right? You know, but it also allowed you to pull it all in to report on it at the various levels to say, here's how we're doing. Even on the people side of things, here's how we're doing. You know, so I think, you know, you can use it as a straight jacket, or you can use it as a very nimble framework. It's really up to you.
I think it sounds like that's the key. I think it's not being constrained by the framework and using it for its best ability of, as you say, like having your individual objectives mapped against it, and you know, reviewing that constantly against a personal development plan. That's absolutely right. Cool.
All right, I see that.
And it just helps the narrative and the discussion as well. Yeah.
I see that we have some questions. Yes. So later we have the book to share, so don't spoiler it, sorry. But what has been the biggest influences on your thinking on the topic of delivering value, apart from the ones that you're going to share later with the books?
That's a tough question. I think from my point of view, it's just continuous learning. I'm not sure there's necessarily one specific example. There are plenty of books and plenty of podcasts and things that I listen to try and remain relevant, but I think it's continuous learning from what doesn't work, iterate it, and getting to a point where you understand what can work from the failures that you've had in the past. I think that's hugely important for me.
I think one of my favorite authors, I almost said of all time, but I don't think he's made it up there yet, is Simon Sinek. He wrote a great book on start with on the power of why, right? Always making it clear why something is being done. And I think if you can get everybody aligned on the purpose, right, then usually it's quite clear how to actually deliver that purpose. When that purpose is lost on the people actually providing that value, then you end up in all sorts of bad places.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably my most influential.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Chris. I think every experience that you do kind of shapes up a lot of what I think about value and where that is and how it goes. And I think in every company, I have to say it's been different. So every company, every project, it's been different. So I don't think there's one answer ever. It's more about how do you take all those answers and figure out what the right one is for whatever it is you're looking at right now.
Yeah. One for me is even if I've been at SuperAwesome for quite a few years now, also in the past, there is always something that is common across all the different experiences that you have. And in technology, I mean, I come from technology. I was director of engineering first, and then I'm head of engineering here. There is something that has been crystallized in the 4 key metrics in Accelerate, the book, that came from the DevOps survey, right? Are you familiar with this, guys? So basically there are metrics that you can measure your systems and your technology teams using those 4 key metrics, because they are drivers of good behaviors and good practices that eventually influence the KPIs. Whatever product KPIs you have, they influence them positively. So they led a survey on, I don't remember how many thousand companies around the world of different sizes, and they ended up with 4 key metrics that are change failure rate, lead time, then there is deployment frequency, and mean time to restore. So I would say that the big influence in technology for me has been that book, Accelerate. Let's jump to, I will mark it as answered and proceed to the other one. What are your ideas on building performing teams when team members are outsourced by the company strategy? That's, yeah, who wants to start on this?
Is that referring to a team that's an outsourced team that's augmented into the current team, I'm assuming?
I don't have the means to connect with the person who submitted the question, so make an assumption and go for it.
we'll go for that. I'll go for my own opinion then. This is something I've done a couple of times, that we've built augmented offshore teams as part of our development team. So I've had teams in Kiev, I've got a team in Poland now as well. I think the key is to have everyone treated in the same way and to augment people into the team in the same way. So always having this concept of kind of the London team versus the Poland team or something like that. That's not a scenario you want to get in. You want everyone to be the same team and everyone is capable of working together on that team. So kind of mixing the team up so you've got different people from different areas and different skills all working together as an effective cross-functional team. That's the kind of biggest success. Just keep everything consistent across everyone that you have in your team rather than try and isolate people. That's my one big takeaway.
I actually think the current situation has really helped level the field, right? Because it's not just a group in a room and then a few people across, and
Everyone's the same now.
everyone's the same. So it's kind of leveling the field from that perspective, and I think that's actually really helped.
Really positive, yeah.
Yeah.
We're looking for the positive in the current situation. I think that's definitely been one of them where we're all in the same space, and then once we're all squares in a video conference, then you know, we're all the same size square.
It's a pretty level playing field, isn't it? So my our situation here is a bit different from what you'd call an outsourced, right? So in Dubai we have all our teams mostly working out of Dubai. We have a combination of permanent staff and consulting staff. To Chris's point, we make it a point to treat everybody the same, right? Obviously, there are some organizational processes that apply to one group or the other, but by those processes that we can't influence, like timesheets and that type of thing for consultants, we ensure that if it comes to professional development, if it comes to well-being, those sort of things that are very soft and fuzzy, we try as much as possible to ensure that everybody gets the same treatment. Because ultimately they're working together in a team. If you work in a team, you wouldn't be able to see who's a consultant and who's not. So why would you treat them differently, right? So, that we found has really boosted, performance and teamwork, and obviously resulted in better output and better quality products for the customers.
Yep. Great insight, guys. Let's jump to another question. What is the best way you found for defining KPIs? Your balls here.
So I'll try that. Command will be short and sweet. So one technique that I love using, I use it in the various ways, is impact mapping, right? And I'm sure Renan might have some things to say about that. And with impact mapping, you sort of go from the high level objective or goal, you identify the personas that it impacts, and then for each persona you come up with the things that will be different for that persona if that particular thing is delivered properly, right? So it's those impacts, and for each impact you sort of identify a number of measurables. I find that doing that means that you're measuring the right things, as opposed to coming up with a bunch of vanity metrics that look pretty but don't really tell you much, right? So if you think about adoption, right, there's some specific KPIs around adoption that you have to measure. If you think about retention, if you think about usage, so there's all those things, but just picking those KPIs out of the thin air, I find defeats the purpose. But linking them to an actual impact that a deliverable has on a persona, I find gives you purpose and substance around selecting the main KPI. So that's how I sort of limit or select what are the important KPIs for this particular scenario. I use impact mapping to help me to pick them.
Yeah, I don't think I've got a huge amount to add to that. I think it's about kind of really defining them according to what is kind of critical or core to your business objectives, and what are the things that are going to be important to the company, and how do we measure those things. And I don't think there's any particular science behind it. I think it's, as you're saying, mapping against impacts, mapping against objectives, and finding tangible ways to measure them. I think it's as simple as that. Yeah. I say as simple as that. It's not simple by any means.
No, it's not simple. Yeah, I mean, because there's a whole lot of KPIs you could use, right? And sometimes you get into unnecessary arguments about which ones are right, which ones are wrong, and you miss the point.
Yeah, I think perhaps an important lesson from that as well is like being willing to change the KPIs if you discover they aren't valid KPIs. So if you are targeting a particular metric and it turns out to be a vanity metric that doesn't actually convert into the business goal that you expected, not being afraid to change that up, I think is important as well.
Yeah, I have two things that I like to test when I have a new KPI. One is I call it the so what test. So when you get a KPI and you say, if this is high, like, so what? Like, what does that mean? What would you do? If this is low, what would you do? Like, what does that mean for you? So that's the so what test. Like, if you, and at the end of the day, if you're like, oh, well, I just know it's that, then it's not interesting. And the second thing is I would ask, I usually ask, what's your next question? So if someone gave you this KPI and said, you know, hi, or gave you this and gave you a number, what would be your next question? You would say, oh, wait, what I would do is I would test if this and this is happening. Is this happening only in one place? Is this happening here? Then there is an action. And I think, you know, oftentimes when we think about analytics, and this is, by the way, we also have KPIs within our system for our customers. So we think about it in the same way, even when we think about the analytics we bring for customers. It's what would be that person's next question? Like, what would you do with this? And what would be the actionable insight that you would actually follow up with from this KPI? And if there's an action that you have following this KPI, then it's a good KPI. And if there's no action and this is not really impactful, then it's not a good KPI. I guess it's a very fluffy way of thinking about it, but it's a good test.
I will reuse the so what question.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing to add here from me is I tend to think about KPIs in a way that they shouldn't be gameable. So you have to, you know, the triangle: fast, good, and cheap, right? So you cannot just measure one of those three aspects, right? So you should measure the three of them and identify if you can game your KPIs, because, you know, you don't want to embellish your KPIs. You want them to say the truth about the performance of your, you know, of your product, team, whatever. So yeah, you should pick them so that they cannot be gamed. Let's cover one more question and then let's move on, also because I'm keeping an eye on the time. How dealing when prioritization criteria is driven by sales targets instead of user feedback, company goals, or mission, especially in small companies? Yeah. How to deal when priority is dictated by sales targets. This is my understanding of this question.
So I'll take a stab at this, and I think this kind of goes back to a lot of the communication and the understanding in that long-term vision. So sometimes, first I'll say this, sometimes you have to satisfy a deal that's coming up, and that is that. And even if it's not really in your prioritization, it's worth taking that round in order to make it work. But I would say that what we always have to think about is, what are the deals right now on the table, and what are the deals that we could be getting if we added this, or that if we could do that? And we always need, because the sales targets are not going to come back and say, you know, here are all the opportunities I didn't know about and I missed, because they don't know about them by definition. So it's our job to say, here's a full market that we're missing or that we're not targeting right now and that we could target if we did this. Having said that, I would say it's still a balance, especially if you're a small company and you're, you know, you want to stay viable and you want to get to that opportunity. You might take that route, and you might need to figure out, you know, what needs to go there in order to do it. And you just understand, you know, how far it is from your goal, how far it is, how much are you straying away from what you're doing? Is this a full year of development of something completely different than you thought? Are you going to be able to learn from this? Are you going to be able to grow from this? Are you going to be able to, is this going to bring you closer in other places? Like, what are you gaining? And kind of, you know, the opportunity cost here is basically what you're trying to reach, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think it's that whole pragmatism thing again coming into it, is like, what is the opportunity cost of doing this thing? And what is the basis of this requirement? Is it something that we see good strategic value, or something that we can add to other customers? Or is it, you know, uniquely one-off to this particular customer, and they happen to be a very high value customer, and I can give you a different lens on how you want to approach it? But, you know, as you said, there are stages in a company's life where there is a requirement to do something that perhaps isn't massively strategically important, but it's very tactically important from a cash flow point of view, or a marketing point of view, whatever the case may be. So it's again, it's like we talked about earlier, it's that pragmatic approach to making sure that where possible things are validated correctly, and when you are making those decisions, being clear around what the decision is that you're making and communicating that at every level. I think that's kind of the important part.
Yep. All right. I I'm mindful of the time, and we are slowly gearing towards the end of this panel. So let me mark this as answered and move on. So before we switch to another thing, which is switch off to our lives, I would really like to get a final piece of advice from you. So out of all the books and all the material that you read in your career, is there a specific book or a specific resource, a specific blog or something that helped you forming your ideas on this topic? It's kind of in line with the first question that we got, but this is the actual question. Yeah. So, and what book, if there was one book, what book would you recommend to read to our audience? Who wants to start?
I can go first. Okay, so one of the leadership styles or tenets that I've sort of come to love, and I believe I try to practice as much as I can, is servant leadership. And you know, as servant leaders, you create the environment that allows people to thrive, to grow, to bring their best to work, and ultimately, to deliver value to your customers. One of the problems in most companies is that people don't feel safe to take risks, right? And as a result, innovation suffers. So one of the books that I found very useful to really help me to understand what it takes to create a safe environment was a book. And I'm going to open my phone so I can show you that. It was a book by Simon Sinek called Leaders Eat Last. I hope you can see my screen. And it's a book based on a story about a military general in the U.S. U.S. Navy or U.S. Army, and how using the techniques in this book, he managed to create safety on the battlefield. Ultimately, it talks about how do you create a safe environment so people can feel safe to take risks and push the boundaries that exist in a typical workplace. So, yep, on this topic, that's probably been my most impactful book.
Great. Chris?
So I think from my background, I came from being an engineer. Obviously, as an engineer, I was a fairly introverted person who, I think, understanding that shift from being an engineer to being a manager and realizing that it's a completely different job that perhaps you're equipped for and you have some of the tools you need, but it is a kind of a sea change in function when you're changing jobs. I think one of the key things for me was kind of helping address interpersonal issues and helping address communication issues and having those difficult conversations with people in the team. Being an engineer doesn't necessarily it doesn't prepare you for that in the same way. So there's a book called Radical Candor, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, by an author called Kim Scott, and I think it's just around kind of addressing those interpersonal issues. It's good advice on kind of better team and relationship management, and really building a successful engineering team based on trust. I think kind of building up those interpersonal skills was something that, it's a constantly evolving thing, but I think a book like this has certainly helped me do that.
Yep, that's a great book. I've read it. What about you, Renan?
Yeah, so I got Thinking Fast and Slow. Hopefully you guys can see it, by Daniel Kahneman. This is a topic that I love. He talks a lot about decision theory and kind of the ways that we trip ourselves in many ways, in the way that we make decisions and the way that we show information. And I think this has been super useful to identify when you're doing those mistakes yourself, and when you're looking at an example and actually thinking that outlier event is the rule, and when you're thinking about those sort of things. So one is to understand your own thinking, and two, to understand when you're listening to others, you're listening to user feedback, you're listening to everything else that's going on. This goes into the prioritization and the value and the feedback and everything else. How do you listen to it in a critical way, and how do you identify these sort of misconceptions or these sort of the way we evaluate information and how we're presenting it to others and the way that we're thinking about it. So I think, and what I love about this book is that he really goes into how would you deal with it in a conversation. So if you're in a meeting and someone makes this sort of thing and you identify that this is one of those cases, how do you deal with it? How do you help them get out of that concept? How do you find out more information? How do you change it? And I think that makes it super useful, and it's a very kind of a very practical book, although it's a very theoretical topic, and I found that it's been extremely useful in many situations.
I have it in my Goodreads. You made me. It's probably going to be one of the next books that I'm going to read. I mean, holidays are coming, so yeah, I will definitely dive into that. Thank you. On my side, I want to chime in and share my 2 cents with you. I hope it's visible. This is inspired from Marty Kagan, Silicon Valley Product Group. Reason why well, what I've learned from it is basically the role of product managers or product leaders in general. So we are back to the point of empathizing with people from other disciplines here. So this book talks about what the role of the product manager is about, the relationships that a good product manager should have inside the organization. It talks about how to assemble the right skills and people. It talks about how to define a strong product culture. That was key for me to establish in engineering. That was really, really good book and highly suggested from me. All right, so let me change the slide because this is well deserved for you all. Thank you, folks. I really enjoyed the conversation today, the discussion. I want to thank our audience for the questions, for participating to our surveys, and for being with us for a bit more than 1 hour. I want to thank you, lovely panelists from different parts of the world. A note in here, Frank is in Dubai, Renan is in New York. So yeah, the side effect of the pandemic is that we get to talk with people in different locations, like if they were here. Thank you guys for being with us. And thank you for hosting to Codemotion, for organizing this panel and this series of panels. And this is really the end of this panel. But before leaving, this was the 3rd panel of this series leading up to the Codemotion conference in October. I hope you enjoyed this panel as much as I did. I really look forward to seeing you all in September, the 15th of September, to discuss the topic of building a resilient organization. With 3 other fantastic panelists. We will have Douglas Talbot, former head of organizational effectiveness, head of CADO technology, and currently head of technology workstream in the public sector here in the UK. Manuel Pais, who is the author of the fantastic book called Team Topologies. I think that will be the book he will suggest next time. And he's also an IT organizational consultant. And Ruth Penfold from HR. She is the people person at Launchpad here in the UK. And she formerly was at Onfido in HR and Shazam as well. And I will be there as well, and I will be your voice again. So that said, folks, thank you all for participating today. I really appreciate your time, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you, everyone.